Good morning, everyone. I don't need to introduce myself, but it is an enormous pleasure to be here looking at this vast array of incredible faces, many of whom are our partners, not only through the amazing Fair Education Alliance, but through many years of support for wonderful innovation and education. This setting feels particularly special, as our wonderful MC said, not only because it's the Science Museum and a place of curiosity, exploration, innovation, but it has nearly 2 centuries history of opening its doors to make education and ideas available to as many people as possible for free, the public and families, reaching millions every year. And we're very proud at Bloomberg to have supported for nearly 20 years. Our partnership with the Fair Education Alliance, as you've heard, and you all know, is really rooted in that same belief in supporting access to all for children and young people, and making sure that wherever you grow up and however you grow up, those opportunities are available and not excluded to you. We're very thrilled to be building on those years of support that the team have mentioned with the Neighbourhood to National Strategy. It really does build on that legacy to strengthen place-based leadership and really give those local communities the boost and the tools that they need to drive meaningful change. And as you know, Mike Bloomberg was a mayor, 12 years of mayor at New York City, and that really does underpin so much of what we do. Our belief in cities as the real kind of engines of change and of progress. So it's a really meaningful extension of that support. Again, you already heard, I don't really need to say much of this because you're so generous in acknowledging how much we care about education and investing young people. We all know that is the most effective way to change society around the world. And we really kind of believe in not only strong leadership, but also really driving data-driven insights and building those collaborations and partnerships that really drive change. And I think just looking at all of you here in the room, and thanks to the amazing leadership of Gina and Sam and the Fair Education Alliance, collaboration is really the only way that any of these important and difficult challenges get addressed at the neighbourhood, regional and national level. So we're grateful to be here. We're incredibly humbled by the amazing work that you do every day. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Fair Education Alliance, the mayors, the MCAs, and of course all of you to ensure that every young person has the opportunity to thrive. And just I must acknowledge my amazing team, Caroline and the team who are running it today, for helping make this happen. And so, over to a great inspiration in the educational space who continues to channel her dedication to driving this mission forward, Vanessa Ogden, the chair of the Fair Education Alliance.
Well, thanks, Gemma. Thanks so much for your words about me, but in particular for your words about this amazing group of people here today, the mission-driven Fair Education Alliance Summit. And it's a real pleasure to stand here in front of you to speak this morning. So first of all, thanks very much, Gemma, and thanks, Caroline, for hosting us here today at the summit and at this amazing place, the Science Museum. It's such a fabulous place, being one of the centres of education. And I can remember as a child, we didn't have money in the family, but as a girl of about 5 or 6 and 7 years old, I remember coming here with my family, and the museums were free then. I mean, that's not a political point, but I'm just saying. The museums were free then. And I can remember playing here in the Science Museum as a child and being inspired by the different exhibits and the sort of interactive nature of it. It's an incredible space in which today to be standing here to launch this summit. And it's an amazing time to be launching this summit because we're just into our first summit here on Neighbourhood to National and our new strategy, of which I could not be more proud. I'm Vanessa Ogden. I've had the pleasure of chairing this alliance for over 6 years, and we've come to this place where we now understand, collectively in society, I think more and more it's becoming part of government policy, that place really matters. And so it's a very special occasion to be here today, to mark that next point in what is an incredible growth in this understanding that alone you can do some things, but together you can make amazing change. And for all the social movements right across history, that has been true. And often they've been driven by the young. Working from Neighbourhood to National is an approach that I've been leading for several decades as a school leader. And that's part of the pleasure of seeing this grow here today. I've been a MAP leader, I've been a teacher, I've been a head teacher. And I have come to understand all that time of working in places of challenge and disadvantage, and really deep-seated disadvantage. I mean, 65% of students on free school meals at the moment at Shoreditch Academy, for example, and at our UTC. That when you have deep-rooted disadvantage, the only way you can address it is through deep place-based change on the ground and connected with wider regional change and connected into national policy. I'm just going to explain a little bit about that now, so it kind of comes from the ground, really. So at a local level at Mulberry School for Girls, when I first became head teacher there 20 years ago now, I can't believe it's that long, but 20 years ago I stepped foot in that school. And what I understood was that networks for youngsters are just so important. If you don't have money, you don't have networks very often. And so the networks that we could open up for students amongst people who walk the corridors of power were important ladders up for our youngsters. With the social organisations that sat around us in the borough of Tower Hamlets, but more widely in London, pulling in all of those resources and joining things up was absolutely critical to the strategy that we needed to adopt, pulling in the assets. So the wonderful organisations that sit around, and I'm just going to name just a few, but Magic Breakfast, for example. You know, breakfast clubs just so essential in the morning because it gets students in and you have more time to prepare them to be ready to learn. When you have disadvantage, being ready to learn when you get to class is absolutely critical because you can't take advantage of the every minute, every lesson, every day that you need. You know, those lessons don't come again, they come once in your life. And so being able to take advantage of those because you're ready to learn is absolutely critical. And then at regional level, looking at London as a region, London has been an incredibly important space for us in which to work. It has really deep-rooted challenges, and don't ever forget that 32 years ago when I started in education, in the schools that I worked in, the first school I worked in 1993, the students had 9% 5 good GCSEs, not even including English and maths. Standards were that low in London. And over 32 years, we've seen things change, but because of the dedication of great school leaders like David Boyle, who I shout out to this morning, who helped me found Reconnect London. And together, we took those lessons of learning through London from our leadership into the wider space and became a space where, okay, so during COVID, where we started, we were really working around disadvantage, finding the research, ploughing the road, making it known to people in government wherever we could, that it was essential that we looked at the growing gap again that we were seeing then. But then after that, as things began to improve, being a place where we deployed school leaders into crisis situations, and frankly, if your school's in a crisis, you can't do anything as a child. It's all happening around you. It's very, very hard. So deploying people into crisis situations in schools and giving them that support. So a real kind of joined up, wraparound approach, both in teaching, but then also that space around leadership, because it is hard. Frontline work is hard. And then again at national level, so taking all of that learning international. And so I had the great privilege to sit on the National Curriculum and Assessment Review panel where we were looking at social justice. So laced throughout the revisions to the curriculum that have been made in that review was the very careful thought about, okay, so if the cards are not stacked in your favour, how as a young person through education can we as a system help to restack them and help it to be the case that actually education can be and should be, and in many places in London where there's great leadership, really is that kind of space where you can learn, develop yourself and bring in all of those advantages that otherwise would be denied to you through that school space. And one of them, of course, is a fantastic curriculum, fantastic teaching and learning, and a really energised space to learn. So bringing that practice-based, on-the-ground work into government is really, really important. So those three layers, they work together. They work on the ground, in the classroom and in schools. They work into the wider system of your region. And then they work into government. And it's a movement flow, a knowledge transformation that must go between all three layers. And the leadership that underpins that and drives collaboration and systems change is critical. which is why today is a celebration of the Alliance and a celebration of all that collectively you are achieving all the way across the country, up and down the land. And it's where we will start to think today about, okay, so in this next strategy, what is the future? How do we give the keys of the kingdom to those children that we care about most, those ones that we're all thinking about every day when we go to work, whether it's in the third sector, whether it's in the business sector, and we have colleagues here who are other funders and trustees as well who represent those funders in other parts of our system. So when we go to work and we think about how we give the keys of the kingdom to the children that need it most, then we think about how the three layers of our work together really, really coalesces and becomes something very, very real. So a warm welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time to join us in our work. We're very glad to have you alongside and bring others with you as you go forward with us over the next 5 years of this strategy. And in particular, a really warm welcome to the representatives of the combined authorities from across the country to really support those place-based collaborations, because that's what this strategy is really focusing on, the combined authorities and their convening power around schools to help lift. And there are some fantastic examples that will become clear to you all today as we go through the learning today and the planning for the future. And of course, to make this strategy possible, a huge thanks to Jemma, to Caroline and the team at Bloomberg for the significant partnership that you've given the Fair Education Alliance to achieve this start. Your incredible track record at Bloomberg for partnering with mayors and combined authorities across the UK and globally has really paved the way for innovation and collaboration across the country. And it's the space in our country that is as yet untapped around schools. To our founding funders, UBS, and I can see Nick, one of our trustees over on the table over there, your support for place-based change has been pivotal to the progress for children and young people. And we're really delighted as a Fair Education Alliance that we can build on that collaboration with Bloomberg to lift yet again. So thank you for helping us start, and thank you for getting alongside on this next stage. And we're also grateful to our long-term FEA supporters, Alan and Overy Shearman, I should say, Barclays Life Skills, the IG Group, Mission 44 and the Paul Hamlin Foundation. And we're delighted to have them joined by the Dulverton Trust and Stratton Chase to ensure the success of this ambitious strategy. So could we have a round of applause for all those funders, please? Now, I want to wish you all a meaningful day, full of new connections and commitments that will drive change forward as we stand shoulder to shoulder going forward. But a message from the heart for me, really. You know, I see so many faces of children, and, you know, when I go to bed at night and I think about the school day, or when I go home and I talk, you know, over a cup of tea with my husband or whoever I'm speaking with, when I go out for a meal with teachers and other friends and colleagues in the profession, you know, it's not the marking we talk about. It's not writing the curriculum. It's the students. And that's the thing. I want to leave you with this. I want you to imagine the face of the children, the faces of the children, but the face of perhaps the most vulnerable children that you work with. And I want you to think about them. And I want you to know that every day, you put in that work. You know, you lift those children. You are just so important to them, and I don't want you ever to forget that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So I am Gina.
And I'm Sam.
We're the co-CEOs of the Fair Education Alliance.
Welcome to the 2025 Fair Education Summit, and thank you so much to the MCs, Jemma and Vanessa, for kicking us off so wonderfully this morning.
So in late November, I was sat in a renovated horse stable with 59 education leaders, some of whom are here today. And we were introduced to the idea of the physical form of how we listen as a listening vessel. We know the shape of our ears for how we hear, but what's the shape of our listening? The ideal listening vessel is big, it's wide, it's open, it's this massive concave shape. And that is absolutely critical because it can take in so much, it can let it settle and it can resonate. But our listening vessels can change shape and size. They can become distracted, they can become really small based on how present we are. And you can imagine that it goes from this massive shape all the way through to limited like a test tube. Today, the size and the shape of our listening vessels will be the number one thing that will impact our experience of the summit because it informs the dialogue that we are going to have. So we encourage all of us to focus on what we need to put in place so that we have those big, wide, open listening vessels to take in everything from today and to be able to take that into action. That will allow the space and the resonance to connect with one another. So I'm going to let you put that into practice. In pairs, I'd like you to take turns answering a question and listening to your pair's response. The first person speaking will have 45 seconds to share their answer. And if you finish quickly, if you answer it in 10 seconds, keep on speaking. This is your time to be listened to. You can expand on some of the detail. And the other person is listening silently. And that person is using their listening vessel to fully absorb what you're saying. I'll come in at 45 seconds and ask you to switch. But during that time, it's just going to be the one person speaking, the other person listening. You'll then have a switch from myself and a sound effect, and then we'll go to the next person. The question that you'll be answering is, what's one thing that's brought you joy in the past week? So I'll give you about 5 seconds to find a pair at your table, and then the countdown of 45 seconds will begin for the first person. Welcome back. Hopefully the chatting and the listening was going well and you're stretching the listening muscles. A nice chance to build those connections. What I'd like you to do now is feedback on how you heard in the same way that you just shared. So what was it like to listen to that person? So who was the first person who listened in your pair? Raise your hand if you're that person. Great. So you're going to speak first this time. We're going to give you 30 seconds to tell your pair, this is what I heard. This is what I heard you saying. And then you've got it. There'll be a gong, and we'll switch to the second person, all right? So 30 seconds, what did I, as the listener, hear you say? Hopefully, it was a really nice experience to get to connect, to be able to share, and really importantly, to be able to listen and learn. And like I mentioned, that is absolutely at the foundation of what today is about, is having that openness and having that curiosity and being able to intake all of what we learn and engage in dialogue. So, what today is framed about is our new strategy, Neighborhood to National. And everything that we have listened to over the course of the past 5 years from you that has shaped this direction. Some of you might remember our summit in 2022, which was focused on poverty, place, and power. And others might have been at our summit last year, focused on systems change and how we collectively shift the conditions that hold inequities in place. What that model is a structure of an inverted pyramid called the Water of Systems Change. And this is at the heart of what we've done as an alliance in our new strategy. So I'll take a moment to refresh ourselves with this structure. This model says that there are 3 different layers to systems change, and that we have to work on all of them in order to tackle those deep-rooted inequities. The 3 different layers are structural, shifting those policies, the practices, and the resource flows. The relational, the relationships and connections and the power, and the transformational, those mental models that are the deepest and can have a ripple effect if we knock them on the rest of the conditions of systems change. So, we're looking at the current context as well, not just what we've heard from you, but we know that this work is needed given the gaps that are still so prominent for children and young people from low-income backgrounds versus their wealthier peers. We're starting to see some progress at Key Stage 2 in GCSE attainment, but we know that the gaps at age 5 and in post-16 destinations are widening, especially for children and young people with SEND. So this year, to shape our strategy, we held 11 different workshops with our members, young people, and different stakeholders, and had a member survey to get your input. A huge thank you to all 209 member organizations who contributed either via the survey or in those workshops. One of the key things that you will hear about today is what you said you wanted as your top priority for engaging in the Alliance. 13% of you said that this was about policy influencing. 41% of you said it was about taking action together. And 39% said that this was about building organizational strength. And so I think it's really fascinating to see what you said and how that then has shaped what we're offering to you as a result. So, Sam, I'll hand over to you to take us through the strategy.
So brilliant. That brings us to our strategy today, a fair education from neighbourhood to national. And it's still grounded in that same vision that everybody here shares, that no child's success is determined by their socioeconomic background. And we want to see greater equity in outcomes from cradle through to career in those 5 impact goals, from development at age 5 through to destinations in education, employment and training. But at the heart of it is you, our members and our community. And the cross-sector collaboration and the relationships between you all is what will drive this. So the strategy is framed around 3 strands: collective voice, collective action, collective strength, and then woven through our 2 golden threads is youth engagement and AI and technology. So what does this look like in practice? So collective voice, first of all. We can all have a greater impact together by uniting around shared messages and a shared voice. Drawing on insights from young people with lived experience of barriers to education, and you, our members, we can shape policy, we can shift national conversation, and we can challenge some of those assumptions that hold inequity in place. So this includes our policy and influencing work. So for example, our annual report card, joint submissions to government, and connecting you, our members, and young people with policymakers. Absolutely essential is that we do involve and support the leadership of young people who you'll see here today with the lived experience of barriers to education in this work. And we enable these young people to co-lead all of our work, not just our collective voice work, and be heard by decision makers. And then the other element of this work, excitingly new in 2026, is about changing the conversation, storytelling and campaigning for shifting the mindsets that are underpinning inequity in our system. And we're beginning some work on mental models this morning, which I'm really excited about.
The second strand is collective action. And this work builds on the working groups that so many of you have engaged in over the course of the past 5 years and beyond. And we're doing this in 2 different ways. These are our thematic working groups, so on early childhood, literacy, and jobs for tomorrow, and the new place-based collaborations, uniting our members and young people on the ground to take a systems change approach to shifting those outcomes for children and young people. The third and final strand of our work, collective strength. This has 3 different aspects. The first is about leadership. You said that one of the key things you wanted was to have that systems change leadership. And so we're offering a new program and suite of programs for all of your team from early career all the way through to your C-suite and trustees. Second is about building that organizational capacity. And so we'll have the training and the mentoring and the shadowing that bridges all of the beautiful insights from different members to support one another to grow their strength in themes like AI and also in areas like fundraising and impact and evaluation. And the third area is our youth Summit. So working with young people directly and providing opportunities for them to engage as a collective. And this is happening on an annual basis. So some of you will have sent your young people before, but we'll be scaling that and offering it to over 200 young people this February and on a basis after that. So hopefully that gives you a good flavor of our strategy. And I'm delighted to now pass over to Sam, who will lead us into our session on mental models. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gina. So we are starting today's summit with a session on mental models. I'm going to start with a short introduction about what is a mental model. Some of you might be wondering. Then we'll be moving into a fantastic panel who will be joining us to discuss the topic. And then after the break, we'll be going into breakouts where we'll be inviting you to do some individual and group work on this topic as well. We're going to be looking at mental models in two ways. So firstly, our own mental models, mindsets that underpin the way we approach this work, and then also shifting wider public mindsets that are holding inequity in place. And we are very intentionally starting with ourselves today. And I'll give a bit of an explanation as to why. So going back to the water of systems change diagram that Gina introduced. Very commonly in our work, we focus on the top level of this, policies, practices, and resource flows. These are easiest to grasp and, relatively speaking, though not always totally easy, easier to shift. We have and we will continue to work at that level, but that alone is not going to be enough to truly transform the conditions that are holding inequity in place for our children and young people. For true system change, we also need to go deeper to the deeper elements of this pyramid: relationships and connections, power dynamics, and ultimately mental models. So what is a mental model? We all walk around with lenses that shape what we notice, what we value, and how we see the world. They're shaped by our childhood, by our experiences, both professional and personal, by the people and communities we've interacted with, we've lived with and lived in, and the places we go and where we live. So these mental models we're going to look at in two ways, as I mentioned, our own and others. And one of the reasons we are intentionally starting with ourselves is because of this diagram. And some of you, this diagram, this is an image, this is not a diagram. This is an image of a traffic jam that some of you may remember that Gina introduced at last year's summit. So, when we're in a traffic jam, we look around and we get frustrated about all the people who are holding up our day. We just want to get to where we're going. Like, why are you driving your car? Oh, wait a minute, I'm part of the traffic too. My behaviours, my attitudes, my beliefs are contributing to what is happening in this situation. So the very first reason we need to start and look at ourselves in this work is because we are a key part of the system that is shaping what happens or doesn't happen for children and young people in education and in their outcomes. But secondly, it also helps to start with ourselves, even when we're thinking about trying to influence others and shift wider public mindsets. Understanding how deeply we hold our own mental models can help us appreciate what it's going to take to kind of shift others. And it's hard. It really is hard. It's so easy for us to sit in this room and think, oh, if only this group did this or thought this, things would be better. When we think about ourselves and our own mental models, we realize how hard it is to shift. And one, we realize it might not be as easy as a campaign. Two, we realize that evidence might not actually be enough to change minds. And three, we realize how uncomfortable and challenging it can be to really go there and say out loud some of the mental models that are holding inequity in place. Or views that are held by ourselves and others, and how this is affecting the system. And as we do this work today, you may find that it might make you feel a bit uncomfortable, or you might be liberated by having the conversations you can't wait to have them. But this is a safe space, a safe community for us to go there, start having these conversations, start saying things aloud that we need to move forward and make progress. Here's an image of a tortoise. And we are living in a very challenging world. And as leaders in this work for children and young people, now is the time to speak up before it's possibly too late and be the change we want to see. So I'd like to offer an invitation based around this tortoise this morning. We'd like to offer an invitation to be bold and brave. And the reason behind this tortoise is Gina came across this, also in the stable, I believe, that she mentioned earlier. And the reason for this tortoise is a tortoise does not make progress unless it sticks its neck out. And we want to invite you to stick your neck out today. And this is a safe space. We're with people who share our vision, people who are like-minded, but we want to go there today with an invitation that then we can be bold, brave, to have the conversations that need to happen today and beyond. So let's all be tortoises. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of thinking now. I'm going to introduce some examples of some mental models that really affect the way our children and young people experience our system. And either in your heads or you've got a beautiful Bloomberg notebook in front of you, if you're someone who likes to take notes, I want you to think about these three questions. To what extent do you think this mental model? Who else thinks this? And how does this affect education inequity? So either in your heads, in your notebooks. So the first one is, education is not a political priority for me. There are so many more important things. Do you think this? Who else? How does it affect education inequity? Okay, so the next one. Actually, education is better in this country than many other places and works for the vast majority. Do you think this? Who else thinks this? How does this affect education inequity? Childcare in early childhood is the best place for children to develop, especially when the home environment is challenging. To what extent do you agree with this? Who else might think it? And then how does it affect education inequity? Next one, university and academic success is the best route for young people to succeed in life. And finally, teaching is a profession to be aspired to. To what extent do you think it? Who else thinks this? And how is this affecting education inequity? Okay. So they are just a handful of mental models that hopefully, as you've jotted down notes or thought in your head, you can see how they are agreed with or disagreed with by people in this room, beyond, and how they're affecting our system. And today, there will be mindset shifts that we consider that we might want to shift in order to get greater equity for children and young people. But this isn't about blaming some people for having the wrong mental models. This is about where there are different viewpoints that exist and accepting that. And there's three ways in which you can accept and approach two different viewpoints or multiple different viewpoints. The first is debate. And this is having a conversation where two people have different viewpoints and it's about winning. It's about trying to say, I'm right, you're wrong, who is correct? Discussion is the second way we might approach this, which is a general chat, and there's no real outcome, but you hear what I have to say, I hear what you have to say, and we move on. Dialogue is the word for today. Dialogue is where we want to hear where the other person is coming from, understand where that's coming from and why, hear each other out, and then find a way to meet each other in the middle or maybe not meet each other where we're at and find a way forward. So, with a few of those concepts in mind, hopefully that's given you a flavour of what a mental model is and set the tone. I'm delighted to introduce our panel for today. We'll be hearing from each of our panel on their own mental model shifts and journeys, and they all bring deep expertise of shifting wider public mental models for system change too. And then afterwards, we're going to be moving into breakouts for you to do some of your own work as well. Okay, so I'd like you to welcome to the stage our panel. Thank you so much for joining us. What an incredible panel, and thank you for making the time for us today. So I'd like to introduce our fantastic panel. So first of all, to my left, Anna McShane, who's the director and founder at the New Britain Project, which is focused on bringing women and frontline voices into policymaking. Anna brings experiences of how stories shape political appetite and has also been a teacher in her former career. Kieran Marhill is Deputy Head Teacher at Central Foundation Girls' School and will offer a really important perspective of the mental models at play in schools and with families on the ground. Kwejo Twaniboa, social housing activist and campaigner. His campaigning, rooted in his own lived experience, has shifted public understanding of the housing crisis and generated significant pressure for institutional change. Nutsai Sithole, CEO at Renaissy and TSIP, combines system-level insight with community organising and brings deep understanding of how hidden assumptions, identity and power dynamics show up in collaborative spaces. Welcome. And last but not least, Sophie Pender, founder and CEO at the 93% Club. Her organisation is dedicated to shifting the mental models around privilege, merit and belonging, which make her perspective vital when thinking about how the sector can reframe public and organisational narratives on equity. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So, I'd love to invite you, first of all, to each share a brief introduction to yourself and share a moment when you realised you needed to shift your own mental model in order to make progress in your work. What was the belief? Why did it matter? And what helped you see it differently? So we'll start with Anna.
Hi, everyone. So I set up the New Britain Project in the lead up to the election last summer. And the catalyst for it really was frustration. Frustration that the policy ideas that were being discussed at the time just really didn't meet the challenge of the moment that we had as we faced as a country. And so to launch, we did a huge poll to kind of demonstrate that challenge really tangibly, and that set the scene for the election. And it showed that not only Britain was broken, but that people felt broken as well. And when you have half the country feeling like they're not reaching their potential, and when you have half the country feeling like they have no agency in their day-to-day lives, only 3 in 10 having any optimism for the future, the social contract feeling like it's broken, and trust in politicians at an all-time low, it was clear that Britain needed a reset. And so the challenge, as I saw it, was for politicians, quite frankly, to be able to get the public to believe anything that they said. And I think it's fair to say that the current government has not quite met this moment. And so reflecting on the mental model that has shifted for me over the past 12 months where we've been putting out research, we've released a huge amount of stuff, some of it really practical, some of it more social contract-y. But the challenge for me was understanding that actually it's not just the public who have lost faith in politics. It's the politicians themselves. And it's not because the politicians don't care, but it's because they're operating at the moment in a system that has almost no capacity to deliver anything and no room to fail. So that's why at the heart of everything that we do at the New Britain Project, we're really trying to answer 2 questions, and I'm sure we'll have time to go into them in more depth in a minute. But the first one is why now? Like, why does this matter now when there's a million problems that politicians have on their list every day? And the second is and how do I actually do it? Not just more money, how do I actually enact that change?
Fantastic, thanks Anna. Kieran.
Hello everybody, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm Kieran. I celebrated a big birthday this year, and here's one of my birthday cards that helped me actually reflect on the mental model that I've worked to shift in my school. Can you see what it says? No? I'll read it to you. It says, you bring main character energy. Now, stories, thank you. Stories often have three main characters: the hero, the villain, and the guide. Now, none of us want to be the villain when working with children, but how many want to be the hero? Pastoral leadership in schools can fall into a hero mindset, believing that we need to save disadvantaged students. Now, this was present in my school. The staff enter the profession with these children in their hearts, which is admirable and essential. But on the ground, we cannot allow that to mean removing children from classrooms, putting them in offices as a way of taking care of them, because that disempowers students. It lowers expectations and it reinforces deficit thinking. Now, I tell my staff that the most effective pastoral intervention is access to high quality teaching, because then the child is empowered to save themselves. Now, I know this because I was that child. I was on free school meals. I lived with a toxic trio, domestic abuse, a mum with clinical depression and an alcohol addiction, who died when I was 13 and my brother was 8. I had every red flag. My life could have gone in very different directions, but I was never made to feel that I couldn't succeed. Adults acted as guides, not rescuing me, but instilling belief and creating conditions for me to thrive. Now, that's what a guide mindset does. It's asset-based thinking. It strengthens conditions, the tools and the environments that help young people succeed, and it recognises their agency and potential. At my school, we're moving away from the hero mindset because it positions adults as powerful agents and young people as passive recipients. That reinforces inequality and dependency. Vulnerable children don't need pity, they need power. They don't need saving, they need springboards to success. They need fewer heroes and more guides.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kieran. It is so powerful to hear your own experiences as well as the way you're seeing that in schools as well. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That was an absolute example of sticking our necks out and being bold and brave. So kudos.
I'm going to resort back into my shell now.
Yeah. We can go back into our shells when we want to as well. Over to you.
Yes, it's really, really good to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. Interestingly, before I started the work that I'm doing now in the world of housing, I did work in a secondary school and I absolutely loved it. And I actually thought that that was going to be the next few decades of my life until it wasn't. But the crossover between education and housing was huge for me. And I learned so much. So I've been doing this work now for the last 5 years, nearly 6 years. And often with the cases that I'm dealing with, it involves young people, people still at school, from places of poverty, poorer backgrounds, and their families, unfortunately, have been left in many cases to suffer for a very, very long time. And it was very different to my experience of working in a school, very similar to my own upbringing as a child, but traveling the country and going into those homes and speaking to those kids, to those parents, to those families. I realised there was a lot that people outside of their four walls didn't know and understand about their experiences and what they were going through. And one of the things that I learned very, very quickly when I started work as a housing campaigner was, in the beginning I was very, very angry because of my own experiences and what I was seeing others going through and the fact that so many people were unaware of the facts and realities of what so many people were being put through. And I really wanted an argument. I really wanted a fight because it was so clear to me the difference between black and white and right and wrong. Going into homes where there's children living there and there's sewage running down their walls or cockroaches infesting their bedrooms, clearly that was wrong and shouldn't have been happening. But for many people, it'd been happening for a very, very long time. But I soon realised that not every conversation I was having was going to be that black and white. And in fact, it would make my life a lot easier to go into conversations with an open mindset, not believing that I knew everything. I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned very, very quickly, and I think will be helpful not just in housing and the work that I do, but across education, across the public sector, is that when we're talking about these sorts of issues, debate is important. And it's not always going to be the case where you have everyone absolutely agree with what you're saying. And you know what? In some situations, I've gone into conversations and left conversations, I thought, yeah, I was absolutely right. Like, I was right. And that's just been confirmed. But then in other conversations, I've learned so much from other people and their perspectives. And I think that's what we need more of. That's how you continue conversation, get conversation going. And I'm sure we'll come on to it later. But for me, that was the biggest lesson that I learned, and very early on too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Quajo. And I think that really talks to the accepting that different viewpoints do exist, and we don't gain anything from ignoring that, but actually confronting that conflict and then having that dialogue to hear each other out. And you might not solve it, and yeah, how to move forward. So thank you, Quajo.
Thank you.
We'll come back to that in a second. Nutsai, over to you.
Hi, nice to be here and great to see everybody in the room. So I'm going to speak about the very beginnings of what you could call my systems thinking journey, which is working through a very deeply held belief that institutions simply cannot change. And this was rooted in my own kind of intrinsic biases and archetypes of power holders that I had held in my head. So who they are, what they believe, their motivations, and all of it always different to mine. Now, where did this all come from? So I am a child who grew up, I was a child even, who grew up in, not a child anymore, very clearly, who grew up in poverty, so grew up in housing that sounds very similar to what Quajo is just describing there, mould on the walls, no carpet, no central heating, and a council that really couldn't care less. I had a brilliant family and who centred education in absolutely everything, and that has enabled me to get to where I am today. But home was really challenging, and institutions were deep sources of mistrust and distrust in my life. Even further and more deeply rooted is my experience of my identity. I am someone whose family grew up in a colonized country. We have, politics is steeped in how we think about things in my household. And so bringing all of this together, as I moved into my working world, into my working sphere of the social sector and the public sector, I was holding all of this intrinsic belief that these institutions do not care, will not care, cannot care, and therefore I must work in a way that positions me as fundamentally different to this institution, tweak it where I can, shift it where I can, do a little bit over here, work under the radar, but ultimately I am not of this place. That is completely misguided. And it gave me a great sense of moral superiority, a sense of separateness, but it also gave me deep strategic naivety. It really, really did. And so whilst I'm constantly working to shift some of that, I am obviously a little bit of a contrarian anyway, but I had to change it. And I had to change it in order to do things that really were challenging and shifting the system, and also centering actually how I am part of every system that I move through, no matter how long I am there for, or what my role is within it, or my perceptions of myself at the time of working in those places. Institutions are constituted of shared mental models and narratives. They are historically and socially produced. We work in relation to one another and all that is swilling through these environments as we move through them. We cannot be separated from them, and we cannot remove ourselves from the complicity to kind of move through them with a sense of responsibility. And I really learned that the very, very hard way. And I'm continuing to learn that as I move through this work in lots of different spaces that I work in now. So the thing that I would leave you with is thinking about this in a more productive way. Recognizing yourself that you are part of the system that you are in, and the system lives in you. No matter where you have come from, no matter what your experiences are rooted in, the system lives with you, in a way, and your organizations, and you are part of that. So how do you move in a way that recognizes that takes responsibility for yourself? And that is why Renee's systems change model, which I'll talk about later, starts with the starting point is always reflecting on self. And then we move through everything else. But I'll leave it there.
And Sophie?
I'm totally distracted by this panel, honestly. I'm sitting listening like, Well, hi everyone, I'm Sophie. It's nice to be here. I'm going to try and stick my neck out, although I'm wearing a turtleneck, so it makes it quite difficult. I've got to be honest, when I was prepping my opening for this panel, I, just being really honest, was going through, do I choose the route that's going to position the 93% Club in the best light possible, because I'm in front of loads of people that I admire, or do I actually be honest about how I feel in the spirit of challenging mental models? I've done a bit of both, being honest, because I think it's really important to call out that it is really hard to shift mental models because there are power structures around us that make us feel uncomfortable to do so. So I just wanted to put that out there before I start. So I'm Sophie, I'm the founder of the 93% Club. We are the UK's largest network of state-educated people. Woo! I can see some members in the room, which is really great. And because it's relevant to the mental model that I'm going to talk about, I just want to start at the inception of the 93% Club. So I set it up when I was 19 at the University of Bristol, almost 10 years ago now, after being the first in my family to attend university. Like many of my panellists, I grew up in a council estate in North London. I was actually born in one of the biggest council estates, somewhere called Graham Park. And that's okay, don't worry. Just telling you my trauma. So you've got to make a bit light of this, you know what I mean? Mental model. Here's another mental model. Not everything has to be depressing, although I do like to do that. This is a really weird note to then carry on, but just pause. My dad was an alcoholic who we lost when I was 12, so Kieran, I really resonate with the same person. And my mum was the youngest of 14 children, no twins, no half-sisters or brothers, totally the same family, big Catholic family. So when I got to university, it was a miracle, and I was very proud to be there. And then very quickly, I felt totally out of place. I was mocked for my accent, appearance, and home life. But more than that, what was said to me and what I saw was that my peers, 40% of whom had gone to private school, came to university with ready-made communities, which was totally different from my experience, which was that I had to leave my community behind in order to move forward. And it was that loss of community that made me start the 93% Club, a particular loss of community for working class, state-educated students, I should say. And then what began as a really small organisation, it wasn't really an organisation, it was kind of 30 people in a Facebook group, grew into a huge national movement in the space of about 6 months in 2020. We went from having one club at Bristol to 50 clubs around the UK. The media then picked this up, which was a blessing and a curse at the same time, and called us the UK's alternative to the Old Boys Club. And then suddenly employers were contacting me saying, we really want to recruit your students. This is an amazing initiative. And just put that into context, at the time, I was doing my training contract at a law firm, and I didn't actually have a legal entity or a bank account, so I couldn't accept any money from these employers who wanted to support us. Obviously, I didn't tell them that, but then it was at that point where I realised that actually this was an organisation that I set up the 93% Club as a charity, so we're a registered CIO. And I think what's really important here, and the reason I mentioned that I was working at a law firm at the time, is when I set up the 93% Club, I never anticipated it ever being my full-time job. It was something that I was really passionate about. And all of us were volunteers. I mean, it was totally unsustainable as a model, but all of us were volunteers, and none of us relied on the charity for our income. And I think this is where the mental model comes in. So once we became a charity, I found myself entering a world where I was often politely told that I should not talk too loudly about private schools, that it was polarising, that it was too political, and that it's going to make other people feel uncomfortable. We were even rejected for funding because the language around state and private schools, and I quote, was too on the nose for the trustees of the fund. They felt uncomfortable because of their own backgrounds or choices they had made for their children, and they didn't want to be made to feel guilty for things that they did for the sake of their family. And they said that they would be willing to support us, that was conditional on softening the language that we used, and they would prefer for us to talk about social mobility rather than state and private schools. So that's what I did. I wish I could say, I said, nah. I said, no, take your money. And we will get to the mental model challenge. But that's what I did. I started to say social mobility because it was safer. It was I thought it was allowing me to get into more rooms. People didn't react to me as adversely when I spoke about it. And it also means that we didn't have to talk about the conditions that some people benefit from, right? And because of that, we started designing programs that people wanted to fund as opposed to things that would actually shift power. And so we were solving symptoms and not structure, and things that would look really nice in an impact report, but wouldn't actually solve the thing that we were trying to solve. And I convinced myself during this period that softer language would help us raise more money, unlock more rooms, and then actually what was actually happening was nothing systemic was changing. I've actually written this. The kick up the arse came when the government announced VAT on private school fees. And please don't treat that as a red herring to say that 93% Club campaigned for it. We didn't. But it was a turning point for me because the public response to this was totally visceral. The idea that some families might actually have to use the state school system caused a huge outcry. And to put this into context, in the 12 months around this period when the policy was announced, the Times and the Telegraph wrote 333 articles about the subject. So that's the maths, almost one a day. Obviously, we think the Times and the Telegraph, maybe we can expect that from them, but the Guardian wrote 50, so that's almost one a week. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that most of these articles were talking about how awful it was for some families who would have to use the state school system. And it was at that point where I thought, if this is the reaction to our state education system, if this is where we are, what am I doing tiptoeing around this subject and talking about social mobility? So I checked in with myself and I asked myself the difficult question, if I wasn't scared of losing funding or upsetting people, what would the most honest and bravest version of myself say? And the answer was immediate, which is that we cannot fix what we refuse to name, which was this private state school inequity. So I returned to the clarity that I had when I was 19, before strategies, before charity language, don't take that the wrong way, before the charity language, before this pressure to keep everyone comfortable. And I reaffirmed that we would not be a broad social mobility organisation, that we're part of that ecosystem, but we would not be this broad social mobility organisation, but we would in fact be talking about the state-private divide because that was what we were best at. And so the reason that was a turning point in terms of my work is I asked a simple question then which really informed the way that we operate, which was, why are private schools so effective at reproducing advantage? And I actually got ChatGPT to build me a private school's theory of change. And then I just swapped the language of private school to state school. And then that became ours. So rather than reinventing the wheel, I just took the existing wheels and put them on a different car. We stopped doing programs that made other people feel comfortable and focused on two things instead, connecting and convening alumni at scale and building the brand of being state educated with merchandise and slogans that you've probably seen on LinkedIn, like State School Proud, not as a fundraising tactic, because it's a genuine mode of impact. And having that clarity, checking in with my 19-year-old self, allowed us to grow the organisation from 7,000 members to 35,000 members in the space of about 18 months. So where possible, I always check in with the bravest version of myself, which does not always surface, by the way. I try not to hide behind the over-academized, can't even say the word, the dense language of social mobility, and try to be direct in ways I would have before I had any stakeholders, recognising that progress doesn't always come from palatability. And I just wanted to say one last thing about being in the charity sector. When I took this job and I left corporate law, I took around, in total, about £100,000 pay cut. That does not make me Mother Teresa. But the reason I say that is because there are some really incredibly smart people in this room, many of which will be in the public sector, but could be in the private sector, being paid significantly more, and I don't think that's fair. But I think if we're going to be in the public sector, then we may as well try and make some change and not try and make other people feel comfortable. 100%.
Thank you to every single one of you panellists for being brave tortoises. And I think you'll all agree with me that they've really put their necks out there and modelled, I think, what the point of today is, to have these conversations and think about our own mental models and lenses and others and how we shift them. I think there was a really interesting theme coming up in there about lived experiences and the experiences of our panel and how that's enabled you all to see the world perhaps from a different perspective to others. And thinking back to that image from earlier with the lenses and how the lenses that we see the world through are shaped by our childhood, who we interact with, the people. I am interested in what's enabled you as the panel to take off that lens and see the world, the system, the opportunities and challenges from someone else's lens, put someone else's glasses on. And what are your tips on encouraging and inviting others to see the world through those different lenses and see it perhaps if they'd had a different lived experience through their childhood as well? So, Quaja, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing that there's a theme here of me just being annoyed at loads of things. But that was one of the things in the beginning that really annoyed me too, is the fact that decisions were being made for people without actually including them around the table, which is one of the things that I really, really wanted to change, and something that I always bang on about when I go into rooms where decisions are being made. And that doesn't matter whether it's housing, it doesn't matter whether it's education or the NHS. I think those that you're there to serve will need to be included around that decision-making table when decisions are being made. That's how we make the right decisions. That's how we come up with the right policies. And I don't believe enough of that happens, unfortunately. So that's one of the things that I really, really wanted to change. But in terms of taking sort of my lens off or my glasses off and looking at other people's experiences, I basically have to do that on a daily basis. And that includes me going into people's homes, different families who I don't know, who I've never met before, listen to their experiences, what they've been through, not just in relation to the disrepair, the visual disrepair that they're living with, but also the context behind that too. And it is horrific, and I think that's what motivates me to keep going. But one message I would say is, or something that I would give is, get comfortable being uncomfortable. The reason I say that is, again, a lot of the conversations we hear and the things that we see are uncomfortable. And that's, again, what I deal with on a daily basis. And when I first started, there was a lot of people. I remember when I started sharing videos, going into people's homes, damp, mold, sewage leaks, all of those sorts of issues. And I have people in the comments section posting, "Oh my gosh, can you put a disclaimer warning on? This is like really uncomfortable." And I'm like, well, imagine what it's like for those actually going through it. Like, people are aware and they need to see this. So that's why I was very determined to spread that message of, like, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because we have to have those conversations in order for the right and most meaningful change to take place. And that's what I continue doing now. So I've been very, like, unapologetic in doing that and trying to deliver that message. And I certainly do think we need more of it across not just housing even now, but again, the public sector in general, and not shying away from those awkward conversations that need to be had, that sort of elephant in the room that no one's willing to discuss, but needs to happen if we're going to get where we need to be. And also this idea of shame. Shame for me has been the most powerful tool in creating the systemic change that I've been able to in the last, I guess, few years. And I almost stumbled across it. I didn't think that was going to be the case until I went into homes, started taking videos, posting it online, dragging organisations, then dragging MPs and councillors. And all of a sudden, the sort of things that I'd been complaining about, those families had been complaining about, the parents had been complaining about offline, and being told, oh, policy says X, Y, and Z. All of a sudden, a bit of shame within 24 hours, tunes have changed, things are getting fixed, things are being done. In some cases, I had one lady on my estate, I remember, 27 years she'd been living in slum conditions, is the only way I could describe it. And then finally, we heard of her story, we saw her situation, she was allowed to actually share her experience. Within a matter of days, it was sorted. And I see that time and time again. And that's because of that tool of shame, which people often find awkward or don't really want to use. But I don't know, maybe it's similar in your experiences. It's been the most powerful thing for me, and something that's been keeping me going for the last 5 years. So, yeah.
I love your videos where you're like, I'm sat in the waiting room. Is
the council office. Yeah.
I'm sat down.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Kieran, how does that interplay with what you were saying about the pity and it almost feels like a tension between getting uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, but also being a kind of the asset-based approach of charity language. But how does that interplay with what you were saying?
I actually wanted to answer your first question,
Yeah.
which was about taking off your lenses, so I'll do that first. I think this is probably the teacher answer in me, what's enabled me to take off my lenses and see things from another perspective is the power of education, is a solid commitment to humanities education that allows people to consider perspectives of your own and others, and a real commitment to lifelong learning. Because yes, that feeling of being right is a nice feeling, but actually being open-minded, being persuaded, seeing things from different perspectives, as the panel said, is where real change happens. And I suppose on this kind of, the feeling of pity or the feeling of shame, or we're humans, we're going to feel the full range of human emotion. And I think it's about harnessing and recognising and reflecting on which emotional energy is going to bring the change that we want. And that will look different for different people. And that's also okay. But as a collective, there probably is a time and place for the full range. Yes, we'll always want to be progressives. We're always going to want to bring hope and positive change to people in our places. But sometimes the cut through is the despair or the frustration. But never the emotion, I suppose, which will disempower another. And that's where I think we need to hold the mirror up as to where we think our frustration is fine, but let's not turn that onto pity for somebody else, because we need to make sure that everybody are strong emotional beings for them to be equipped with the tools to shape their own lives.
Thank you. And Nutsai, where have you seen this kind of shift in lenses at play in your collective impact work that's kind of been holding progress back?
So I think where I've seen this really profoundly is in contexts and with organisations that have committed to the work and have done kind of collective and individual work as teams, as organisations, as departments, to really think about how the kind of quiet wiring of their organisations and their ways of being are contributing to them not really achieving what they set out to achieve. And what that looks like is, you mentioned the systems iceberg earlier. It's everything that sits below what you can see and feel every day. There are ways that we kind of short circuit deep thinking because we already know what we need to do in this particular scenario. Or, the way that we speak in a particular meeting to get something over the line, or how I move through this particular part of this journey in relation to a strategy, for example, because I know that's how I'm going to get the job done. How incentive structures incentivize ways of being, ways of seeing, ways of making progress that completely get in the way of any kind of strategy or approach that's supposed to be aimed at systemic change, which is long-term in nature, which is emergent in nature, which is non-linear in nature, which is deep in nature, right? And then often the organisations that I've worked for, some of the biggest, most complex institutions of the country, there's all of this stuff that we're all swimming in under the waterline. And where I've seen this really make a difference is where organisations take everyone on a journey of recognising that this work, it's not about writing the strategy and a strategy launch and having an exciting time, being like, hey, we are doing systems change, aren't we amazing? Is actually really boring, hard, sticky work. And a lot of it is relational. So it's thinking about, number one, how are your teams and in your organisation relating to one another? How are their incentives operating in service of this wider shift and change? And how does that need to look completely different for this overarching goal that you have? That's quite boring mechanical stuff, but it's also really important relational work. I think in addition to that, there's this complete shifting of how you think about your organization's position in the world. We're often working with, at Renaissance and also in my past roles, very large organizations, philanthropic institutions, big business, etc. And there are ways of thinking about legacy and what it earns you and your position that kind of come up again and again and again And individuals start to imbue that as you become part of an institution as well. You start to hold yourself slightly differently, and you have a sense of what it is you're here to do, et cetera, and we all do it. We all do it. Again, part of the work and the shifting of the lens is actually, hang on a second. If we say, for instance, we want to shift power to communities, or we want to work in ways that are deeply participatory with the schools that we're working with, or with the families that we're working with, et cetera, then that means you have to decenter yourself and your organisation's priorities completely. And that is easier said than done. And as I mentioned at the start, this is where some of the minute detail of how your organisation functions and how you relate to one another and your incentive structures must shift and change alongside your organisational strategy. And if that organisational change doesn't keep up, that culture change doesn't keep up with your proclamations and our proclamations of what we're trying to achieve, it's ultimately going to fall down. I've experienced this. I'm not outside of this. I've experienced this. I've fallen foul of this. It's really essential that you start with a kind of internal machinery. What's underneath everything we say we are doing? What's really driving our behaviours in this organisation? What do we really care about? What are we counting? What are we measuring? Why are we doing that? All of that. When you shift those lenses, that's when you start to move towards genuine systemic work. But it's very, very tricky to do and takes time.
Thank you so much. I think that's such a brilliant invitation for us as leaders of charities to make sure that we're decentering our organisation and putting that purpose at the heart. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn over to the audience now for some questions from you. I'm sure you've got lots of burning questions for our brilliant panel. There should be a roaming mic somewhere at the back there. And so just raise your hand if you have a question for our panel, please.
Thanks so much. It was really fascinating. I'm really interested in the tension between what you're saying around how to shift mindsets and really be true to what we collectively want to achieve, and the funding landscape that drives a lot of organisations, charities, non-profits, particularly smaller organisations where it can be really hand to mouth. You've got quite a small team, and I've seen, not only in my personal experience, but from other people as well, that kind of real clash where you're desperately trying to pursue these goals that are so important, but you keep getting drawn back to needing to follow the money. And as you really eloquently pointed out, often funders aren't necessarily kind of supportive of what you're trying to achieve, and you have to kind of tweak and twist to meet what they need. Do you have any advice in how to make those two line up, and how to keep going, how to be sustainable whilst also being true to what you want to achieve?
Yeah, great question.
Sophie, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I think funders have a lot to answer for. I think don't take that the wrong way if you're a funder in the audience. 93% Club does accept donations. But I do think I've had a really interesting perspective coming from the private sector into the charity sector, because I had no assumptions about the way things should operate. And I think there's a couple of things that you've raised there. I think there's two parts here. I think the tension that you're talking about, and we just had a little sidebar there, is it's really difficult in the charity sector because it requires like a huge amount of ego death, right? In terms of realising that actually there may be certain things that you're doing that might not be like particularly effective, and so they're not operating in the right way, and so instead you pivot to funding that's available, but that might not be the right thing to do because you're, if we're being honest, sometimes you're just trying to keep yourself and your team gainfully employed, and I think that's a really difficult tension. And I think that the horrible answer is that you need to be comfortable with that risk, that actually if things aren't working, then they're not meant to work in that context. I'll let the others reflect on that point, because I know it's a constant tension with charities. I think one way that we overcame that was when we weren't, when a lot of funders were rejecting us on the basis of the language that we were using, the fact we were talking about state and private schools, we thought to ourselves, it was a necessity. I remember in the week that I got rejected from this, there's one funder who had said, we're going to give you this huge transformational funding. You need to quit your career as a lawyer in order to be able to accept it. And so I was preparing my resignation notice, and then it went to the board of the trustees of the fund, who then said that they didn't think the issue was important enough to fund. And then about 4 days later, unrelated, but just to add the cherry on the top, I lost one of my teeth. So that was a real low point. Not related, but just it was like one of those weeks where you're like, I actually just don't think it can get any worse. They're all fine now, obviously, but they look great. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, had to fix them. Falling out from stress. But that week, I sort of checked in myself and I thought, okay, well, actually, this clearly is not a sustainable funding route. So I thought to myself, who are the people we're trying to serve? Who are our members? And I managed to set up a membership model for professionals to pay to become paying members of the 93% Club. Because I thought to myself, what are the traditional sorts of funding that people are telling me that I should go after? They're clearly blocked. So actually I need to think about who are the people who do support what we're doing and how can I create commercial income from them? So it does create a bit of innovation. But sometimes as a charity, you can feel like there are so many people who are there like, how do I get involved? How do I get involved? How do I get involved? And we're like, actually, I don't know, how to channel this energy. But then at the same time, we're like, well, these funders won't give us this large sums of funding. So actually, if you can try and combine the two and unlock people who want to support you, that for me was it was honestly transformational. Setting up the professionals network created like a huge amount of income for the charity and a huge amount of impact as well, because I then had this volunteering pool of people who I could then use for my students. So I was like, this is brilliant. So I think sometimes you have to innovate outside of the traditional structures. Yeah. And, we're not going to be able to cover different ways of doing that. But the other thing that I would say about the funding landscape, and I think this is I don't know what the exact mental model is for funders to overcome, but I am sometimes totally shocked by the behaviour in the philanthropy sector. We have two funders who are absolutely amazing and they support us and there's no sort of strings or bells attached. But we have been invited for funding before where it's like, well, we want you to be the charity partner. But then you have to come and do a presentation to 50 people, do a song and dance, give us volunteering for 70,000 of our staff members. And I just think to myself, well, do you care about the work that we do, yes or no? If the answer is no, that's totally fine. But the answer is yes. Yeah. And if you think we've got good governance and you trust in the impact, then why do we have to do this song and dance? So I think it's not just about the charities, it's about the funders actually looking at their own mental models about how the way that philanthropy is done and whether it has to be that way. So I think that, when we have these breakout rooms, I think there's also checking in with yourself, which is that, is this the best way to fund people? Or is this just making me feel really good about myself 100%. In this situation? Absolutely. So yeah, two things there, but really happy to talk to you about the innovation piece. But that was my sort of soapbox on the...
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then just to let you know, our speakers will be in the breakouts as well, so there's going to be plenty of time to unpick some of these really meaty topics as well. So I have one more question from Zulum at the front there, please. If we can get the microphone, Naomi. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. This has been brilliant, and thank you, team, for putting this on. This is a question for every single panelist. Could you please name your favourite mindset shifter? It could be from culture, politics, society, social impact. But one individual or campaign where you thought, oh my goodness, yeah, this is it. I see things differently.
God. Thank you, Zulum. Great, and I'm going to extend that so you can do your wrap-up with that question. So if you can share the answer to Zulum's question, your favourite mindset shifter, and what they've done and why, and that'll be your final word for this panel, and then we'll be moving into breakouts afterwards as well. So Anna, we'll start with you.
Hi, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about some of the frustration that drew me to set up the New Britain Project, which was when I was a teacher, obviously lots of things would come down from government and you'd sort of think, who wrote this? Like, where did this come from? Like, when were you last in a school? Was it when you were in school? And that kind of was another piece of the puzzle that made me set up a think tank. And so with the work that we do, we really try and bring in frontline voices. But over the past year, if we're going to stick our neck out and so on, over the past year, I've been invited to be onto lots of like working groups where they bring in frontline voices. And it's always the same people that are those frontline voices. And it's people who are doing really well and they've got really, really important stories to share. But actually the people they need to speak to are not the ones in the room. They're the ones that are really struggling and don't know what to do at the moment and haven't got any headspace to think about it. But they're the ones that really need help. So I think if I was going to sort of leave you with one last thing, it's to think about when you're engaging both with young people and with frontline voices, who are the ones actually that you really need to speak to, not just the ones who are doing well, but the ones who are really struggling and actually maybe don't even have the capacity to engage with you. How can you go out and find them and make it easy for them to engage with you? And then the second point is just, I can't underplay, so this is just for those of you who are kind of engaging with politicians or policymakers, I can't underplay how stretched they are. And I do think there is a need for everybody who is campaigning for things, you know, who needs change in Westminster to make change where they are, to really be a bit more sophisticated and maybe kind of coalesce around a few priorities. Because if we just keep going to them with another really important problem, and these are all really important problems, and, you know, I'm sure all of you have a list of 10, I think a straightforward criticism of this government would be that they're not prioritising very well. So it's kind of incumbent on us as campaigners or advocates or whatever we describe ourselves as to do some of that prioritisation for them. And then I think we'll be able to see some more change.
And who's your favourite mindset shifter?
Yes.
I'll come back to you.
Come back to me.
Kieran.
Okay, so we've been told it's okay to not always be right, to not always debate, to enter dialogue. So I'm going to address your question in that spirit, which is I don't actually have an answer. So over the course of perhaps today's learning, I will. But listening, I think, to the first question about funding from a charitable model, actually sitting here as somebody who works in the public sector, you know, our funders are the public. So the mental model that I wish that I could say has been the most successful, but the one that I believe would be in the service of disadvantaged children, that we're not quite there, is accepting that tax is not a burden. If we believe that public services operate for the public good and everybody benefits from that, then tax is not a burden. And I'm waiting to find the mindset shifter to do that.
Yeah. Rachel Reeves, no?
Oh, do you know what? My mind's just gone blank. I'm trying to rack my brain for a name. But I really, really wanted to come back onto that last question first that you asked around funders. And I purposely have decided not to set up a charity or a foundation or anything like that up until this point. And I think, as discussed, one of the reasons is to do, I think, with funders. And for me, I really, really value my freedom to say what I want, when I want and how I want, and not be reprimanded for that or to have my message diluted. I think it's really, really important to me, and the thing that I think I value most about the work that I'm doing. But as you know, with the funding sector as a whole, and again, as mentioned earlier on, this worry and this idea of sort of your messaging being watered down in order to meet certain criteria or jump through certain hoops in order to get funding. I mean, the question should be, do you agree with what it is that we're doing, or do you not? I mean, it's one or the other, in my own personal opinion. But what I was going to say was, in regards to that, I think there needs to be a lot of change, and there are smaller organisations, there are individuals out there doing a lot of work to try and change things across sectors. And within the funding world, I don't think there is enough space in order to value the work that it is that they're doing, and often there isn't funding out there for them without then having to sacrifice your own message. So what I would say for everyone in this room is, before our job titles and everything else, we are all human beings at the end of the day, and we have to remember and understand why it is that we're here doing what we're doing, and whose lives are we doing it to improve. And I think that's the message, regardless of whatever it is that we do. Whatever funding opportunities we apply for, we always have to remember that and what our messaging is, and we always have to try and stay true to that. I think that's the most valuable thing, but also the funding sector really, really does need to change. And then in terms of people, I would say, I mean, it's interesting because they're people closest to me that I see on a daily basis. I see their work, and it's often grassroots campaigners who are doing work around, I can name them my friends. I mean, Sarah's a journalist, but she's done things recently on maternity care on Sky News today, and CSE, for example, around young people, poverty, housing, anti-knife crime campaigners. All of these people, I guess, outside the four walls of Parliament and Westminster that are out there on a daily basis really trying to change lives. Those are the people I think that inspired me, and especially with my mindset. So yeah,
Amazing.
100%.
and staff working in education too. I have to say, shout out you guys.
I'm sorry, I just have to jump in on the funding thing. I'm so sorry. Can I just I'm coming.
I actually have people, by the way, so I think
Okay, well, we'll finish on some. We'll finish on the
people.
optimum mindset shifter in the world.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just quick things.
Final
on this.
comment.
Completely agree. The philanthropic space in particular must change. Is changing, but must change quicker. And I think the stance, whether we're talking about education, a level of change that's required. We're here today to talk about education, required in the system to support those who are most disadvantaged, who are most disconnected, or are structurally kind of excluded from schooling. We really need a completely different stance, if I'm honest, from the philanthropic space to address these challenges in deep ways. And that goes for so many other areas in public life at the moment, or in social life at the moment. There's so many things that we must be moving with a level of urgency that I'm just not, unfortunately, seeing, particularly from those who have the power to unlock, assets that are beyond imagination in many pockets of the world that we work in, who have access to so much power and resource, and unfortunately are only touching the surface of what they are actually capable of doing. And this is where these ideas of kind of risk and risk aversion and what we are here to do and self-preservation really come to bear, I think, in the philanthropic space. Now, that's not to blame or to shift responsibility, but I think it needs calling out. There is a protectionism that perhaps kind of is quite pervasive in that space. And we work with a lot of brilliant funders who are really trying to shift themselves into a different place, who are making progress, but it's not far and it's not quick enough at the scale that we need. Where you can actually do something about this, though, is that internally, if you work for an organisation that perhaps has more access to some of the bigger players or philanthropist individuals who are giving away their wealth, some of their wealth, you can work with them in a slightly different way. And I think if you have the time, the capacity and the resource to bring them together around a shared sense of purpose and take the time to walk them through, I know this is a lot of work and labour that you will have to do, but taking them on that journey with you towards shifting their own way of thinking about how they're dispersing their wealth, this can create a completely different way of operating. I've been part of doing this before in previous organisations, building kind of collectives of philanthropists around particular issues and setting them a good old target that they can absolutely aim for. 10 million quid in 5 years, off you go. Bring your networks, bring your collective resource to this problem and this challenge and help them to think about the problem that they're supporting collectively. That often helps, but taking them on that journey with you alongside your organisation can be a thing. But then also the wider philanthropic sector needs a bit of change. My favourite systems changes or systems shifters or thinking shifters, I think, similar to what you said, Quadro, are the likes of Rekindle School, for example, and Ruth, who's doing really incredible work. So drawing on the history of Black supplementary schools as a way of thinking about how you increase inclusion and access for young people in education. Today, I'm thinking of Kids of Colour Network, for example, who are thinking systemically about the problems facing young people today, not just in education, but in kind of exposure to youth violence and a whole range and plethora of other things. And they're bringing joy and creativity and passion and incisive views on what needs to change to the table. And they're doing it really brilliantly on a shoestring. So I think those are my favourites.
Thank you. And one name from you, Sophie, to wrap us up.
I'll give you two, but short answers. Promise. Zoran Mamdani, I'm obsessed. I think he's a really good example of you can say what you mean in a way that's true to your values without offending people, if you can have a conversation with Trump. And there's this sociologist who works in the sociability space that I really want to call out, Louise Ashley, which many of you probably have worked with. She really transformed the way that I see social mobility. I used to think we needed to fix working class kids and make them have different accents and stuff. And her research, which was basically like, this is terrible, completely transformed the way I took 93% Club. So I wanted to call her out as well.
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, that is all we've got time for from the panel. But as I say, they'll be joining us in the breakouts, which is fantastic. Please join me in a round of applause. That was phenomenal.